What percentage of your patients are willing to do a water-only fast for at least a period of 3 days?
Right off the bat, because we offer this as a treatment to everybody. We don't say, okay, well, if you've never heard of it, we'll still recommend it. And like 50% right off the bat won't do it. Any fasting at all, right? They're so like ingrained. And I had this discussion yesterday with a fellow. I told him, oh, he needs to fast. He was developing, proteinuria, and he was going into renal failure. And I said, really, you need to fast. And he says, my endocrinologist says I can't fast. No way. So it's like, okay, that's it right there. So 50% of people won't fast for any period of time at all, like not even like 5 hours, right? So it's changing. I think views on fasting are changing, but you can see, like, did you read that whole thing with Jack Dorsey? He gets on CNBC or whatever, and everybody goes like crazy that, oh, he doesn't eat for 24 hours. It's like, what's the big deal? Like, why do you think we carry body fat, right? And it's like, look, he's looking good. He feels good. What's the big deal? Why are you getting on him, right? But the idea is so ingrained that we have to eat, have to eat, have to eat, even to lose weight. We have to eat, that they won't do it. So if you take away the 50% who won't do it right off the bat, then you have people who will do it for short periods of time, and probably only about 20% might agree to like a longer fast, mostly. And it's not the physical side that actually gets them, it's always the psychological side. The physical stuff is super easy to deal with. It's the psychological part that's really hard. That is when you're looking at somebody who's eating and you're trying to fast. It's like really hard, right? And yeah, you can do it once in a while, but if you do it sort of breakfast, lunch, dinner, breakfast, lunch, that's the hard part. And that's where we focus a lot of our attention, working on the psychological, how to set your environment up for success, and coming up with different strategies for success, and creating a supportive community that's going to help your success. That's the hard part. Because think about religions like Ramadan. How do they all fast? Because people say, oh, I could never fast. It's like, but you know that literally hundreds of millions of Muslims fast. It's like, it's because the environment is supportive. If all your friends are doing it and all your family, it's not fun, but it's not that difficult to actually do it. And that's the difference. And now we're recommending it for people who have no community, and that's what we're trying to create, community of people who are accepting. And also that's part of the point of bringing it into the mainstream. I wrote a couple of books about this, of course, and that's the point. If I wrote a couple of articles that I sent to JAMA or something to get peer reviewed, first of all, the peer review would kill it. And then second of all, you'd get no traction whatsoever. And then you're not doing anybody any good, because by making it sort of more out there, you make it more acceptable for people to talk about it and to accept it as a viable treatment.
So let's go through some of that stuff. So that, let's say that 40-year-old patient, first of all, appreciates the severity of what you've shared with him and his dad, which is, look, it's one thing to have diabetes, which you do, but you're actually in quite a late stage of this. I don't remember the literature on this, but from my days in surgical training, the 5-year mortality once you have an amputation with type 2 diabetes is staggering. So I don't remember what it was, but it was so high that the point was, once you're getting a toe amputated or a foot amputated or something like that, the probability you're going to be alive in 5 years is incredibly low. So I could be wrong on this, but I feel like the 5-year mortality was something like 70%. So if you're in your 40s and you're already getting a diabetic ulcer that's not healing, there's a non-zero chance. There's actually a significant chance you're not going to make it to your 50th birthday. So he says, I'm in. You mentioned something that I think can't be overstated, which is you have to be in a supportive environment. So if a patient tries to fast and they are surrounded by people, both their friends and family and also their other medical practitioners who are telling them this is a horrible idea, well, that's a recipe for failure. So now let's posit that we've also got the support of the medical team and the friends and family. What are some of the other tricks and trades? I mean, one of the things that I hear a lot about is, Peter, my sleep is really hard when I'm fasting. How do you address that?
Yeah, that's a tough one because they all can't sleep. There's not that much to do. We tell them, one, to expect it. So it's one of the things is that if they know about it ahead of time, then they're much more accepting. So we say, look, you may have a lot of trouble going to sleep because people don't understand, but the whole sympathetic nervous system and everything gets revved up, right? Noradrenaline and all that stuff gets revved up. And a lot of people actually can't sleep. And we say, well, you know what? If you find that, then, stay up, do some work and so on, and don't worry about it, right? This is a temporary situation. It's not going to last forever. We just want to make sure that everything gets better. And that patient, I don't think he had any sleep trouble, but we did warn him. So one of the things we do is we warn him ahead of time of all the potential problems. So it's like the book What to Expect When Expecting, right? So it's not like it makes the symptoms any better, but it makes dealing with it a lot better. So we tell them, hey, look, you can have headaches. Those will go away. You can have cramps. This is what to do. You can have diarrhea. This is what to do. You can have constipation. This is what to do. Sleep is, you can expect this. And you need to watch this in terms of your blood sugars and so on. And this is what to do with your medications. And that patient, we actually, I think his last A1C that we saw was like 5.9, which here is actually classified as non-diabetic, not even pre-diabetic. So we took him from a couple of medications and a non-healing diabetic ulcer to non-diabetic. Like within a couple of months, yeah, it took a little bit longer than somebody else. And everybody responds differently. And even a couple years later, he's like non-diabetic, right? So it's like that was the whole point. We miss, in medicine, it's so difficult because we're so ingrained into these patterns of thinking. That is, you have obesity, which causes type 2 diabetes, which causes a foot ulcer. So we get the plastic surgeon to debride the ulcer. It's like that's the least important part. You need to get rid of the diabetes and get rid of the obesity, and then he will actually get better. So warning people ahead of time is one thing that we do, and it doesn't make the problem any better, but it makes them deal with it. One, they trust you because they go, oh, hey, I got a headache for 3 days and then it went away. So they know you know what you're doing, and that gives them confidence. And then just having that support. So he had his father, of course, who was going, yes, 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 you need to do this. And that came from his religion. So it was a good setup for that. Many times we'll actually get the opposite, which is what you're saying is that I'll get that patient, I'll say, this is what you need to do. The family says, oh man, that's crazy. And the family doctor says, oh man, that's crazy. And the endocrinologist says, you must never do this. Then nothing changes, right? They have this and so on.
My tip on this one, Jason, is that in anticipation of that sympathetic outflow, we recommend that patients take phosphatidylserine with the fast in the evening, and that sort of calms down the adrenal glands. And then even just an oral over-the-counter GABA, unfortunately, it's becoming harder to get centrally penetrating GABA over the counter, but even just peripheral GABA will sort of take down some of that sympathetic tone. So that, coupled with some other sort of sleep supplements, actually not only tends to help people sleep, but a number of people note that you can have some of the best sleep imaginable with those lower levels of glucose, higher levels of ketones. Now, what about electrolytes? How do you manage the electrolytes, in particular sodium and magnesium, during these longer fasts?
There's nothing specifically we do, actually. So we monitor it very closely, of course. Magnesium is the one. So everybody worries about sodium, and you can get some people who do get a bit sodium depleted. But if you're otherwise healthy, your kidneys should never get to that state, because there are people from the Intersalt study, there are people that actually barely eat any salt at all and still survive fine. So your body should be able to reabsorb all the sodium it needs. Magnesium's a bit more difficult because a lot of type 2 diabetics are depleted of magnesium to start. So we'll often recommend magnesium supplements, and that's where a lot of the cramps and so on kick in. Some people do get a little dizzy and so on, so that's when we use the bone broth, which is technically not a fast, but it's like got calories and amino acids and stuff. But that's where we'll use bone broth, for example, where you can put a decent amount of salt in and take it and still feel well. We monitor the electrolytes more just because we want to make sure that nobody's getting into trouble. But I'll tell you that the number of times that I've actually had to intervene or tell somebody to stop a fast because of electrolytes is like zero, I think. I don't think I've ever had a case where the blood work came back and said, oh my God, they have to stop. There are some other things, like if they get diarrhea, for example, and it can be fairly significant, then that might play a role. But when they get those, we tell them stop. And we are always like, We're always super cautious because we monitor them very closely. These are relatively sick patients, right? So they generally have a lot of medical issues, but we monitor them very closely and we give them very careful instructions that, hey, if you don't feel well, you need to stop right away. Don't even tell me. Stop it and then tell me, right? Because the point is that let's figure out what's going on. Then, if it's a solvable problem, then we can do it starting tomorrow. Or we can do a totally different regimen, shorter, fast, more frequently. We're not stuck to this one thing. Or we can do ketogenic diets, or we can do something else, right? There's all kinds of things that we can do without doing a long fast. And some people actually hate the long fast, and some people actually love the long fast. So we always say don't get so rigid in your thinking that you have to push through. Like the one thing we tell people more than like don't just push through because that's when you're going to get yourself into trouble. There's always tomorrow to start another fast if we figure out what's going on with this.
Don't you find it's helpful to explain what you're pushing through? I mean, for example, even if I fast for 7 days, there is no day during that 7 when I am not at least at one point quite hungry.
Oh yeah, the hunger for sure. We always say you can be hungry, but make sure you're not like lethargic or something.
I think it's important for patients to understand even seasoned fasters still get hungry. But what I find interesting in my wife who doesn't fast but is sort of interested in like why I do it, she can't believe it, right? She can't believe that, I'll work long, hard days and exercise and do all that stuff while fasting. And she's like, aren't you just starving? And I said, truthfully, yes. Every single day I feel quite hungry at some point in the day, but it's never more hungry than on a regular day if I'm getting really hungry. Like being hungry on the 7th day of a fast is not a more profound hunger. It's the anticipation of that becomes problematic, which really speaks to the Shakespeare quote about nothing is either good or bad, but thinking simply makes it so. The anticipation of that hunger seems to be a bigger problem. Maybe for your patients, it's less of a concern because the highest priority is the amelioration of the diabetes. But do you spend much time thinking about how they can minimize muscle mass loss with the obvious loss of protein intake? Or do you just say, look, it's so intermittent that we do this fasting that we're going to take whatever we have to take in the most catabolic sense and then deal with it on the back end? Or do you do anything specifically with respect to exercise?
Nothing specifically, because again, I'm treating different population. Like I'm not treating bodybuilders, right? I'm treating 65-year-old women. For them, it's like they don't even know how much muscle mass they have. And honestly, I'm not even sure. Like there is some protein loss, and I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I mean, I think that most people actually don't get a lot of muscle loss. Like you can get protein loss, which is connective tissue and skin. And this is one of the things that people always rag on me about, but this is clinical medicine, right? So I've treated thousands of people with fasting, and some have lost a lot of weight, like hundreds of pounds. And I've documented a few case studies in my blog and stuff. And one of the things that's very unusual about fasting for weight loss as opposed to weight loss for other things is that we don't see the skin problems because skin is protein, like it's not fat, right? Skin, connective tissue, it's protein. And you do go, when you do the intermittent fasting, you do go through that period where you have gluconeogenesis and you're breaking down protein. That's the whole point of autophagy, for example, is breaking down protein. It's not fat. And I'm not sure that it's a bad thing. So we actually get much less. I've never referred a patient for skin removal surgery, and some people have lost like 150 pounds for like years, right? And they actually don't notice the problem. A couple of my colleagues who I work with, and they've noticed the same thing, that you don't have as many of the problems that you do with regular sort of weight loss, which is chronic calorie restriction, where you get these big flaps of skin that you have to go in surgically and take out. The question is, why doesn't your body get rid of them? Because it's superfluous. Your body shouldn't be keeping it around. Your body should be getting rid of it. And it doesn't because you never went through this period where you're undergoing gluconeogenesis, where you actually are breaking down protein. So, do you get more muscle loss? There's been a couple of studies on alternate daily fasting, which really haven't shown increased muscle loss or lean loss. I think that the protein loss is often confused and called muscle loss. To me, it makes no sense. Like, your body has a system, and I'm not talking the situation where you have 4% body fat, right? I'm talking about a situation where you have 30% or more body fat. It makes no sense that the body should store food energy as glycogen and body fat, but the minute you need to use it, you start burning muscle. do we think our bodies are really just that stupid that they're going to do that? It's like storing firewood for the winter, and then as soon as you need to use it, you chop up your sofa and throw it in the fire. Like, who would do that? But we think that our bodies are just that stupid. It's like, I don't think their bodies are that stupid. I think that there's a period, which is fairly limited, during the fasting where you have gluconeogenesis, then you can see fat oxidation goes way up, right? And Kevin Hall, I think, did some of these studies on what happens. And Cahill, of course, did all those studies, on what happens during actual starvation. And you got to remember that he was no wimp, right? These are like 60 days of fasting, right? Not like 16 hours. It was huge. And these people were not even overweight. It was, there are some studies that you just think, wow, how did they get away with that?
It was before the days of the IRB.
I know there was a great study. I don't know if you've seen this. There's two studies where they took people who were not even overweight. They fasted them for 60 days and gave them a big slug of insulin. It's like, why? It's like just to see what would happen.
Well, no. I mean, that study was to actually see if the ketones were protective in the presence of hypoglycemia. They injected those patients with insulin, took their glucose down to below 1 millimolar. These people are walking around with it. Yeah, they did totally fine, provided they had enough BHB. That's an incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible. But you'd never get that study done today. You'd get thrown out, like you'd get laughed at, right, by the IRB. Like, you're going to drop people's glucose to less than 1? Like, are you serious? Everybody now thinks if you don't eat for 24 hours, you can get seizures, right? But the point is that, yes, it was for the ketones and stuff, but it's a great study, like it's stuff that you just couldn't do these days. But the amount of protein, so when you look at all the Cahill studies and all the classic studies of fasting, that's a relatively limited period that you're actually burning. You've got the gluconeogenesis and you're burning protein, which I actually think is a beneficial thing in the right situation where you have somebody with obesity and so on. And if you look at studies, like Nuttall did a bunch of these studies, and he tried to estimate how much excess protein somebody who is overweight has. It's like 20 to 50% more protein than a regular person. There's more skin, there's more muscle, there's more connective tissue, there's blood vessels, there's all kinds of extra protein that goes along with being overweight. And that all needs to go if you're gonna do it. So I'm not actually worried. Like, so again, I've treated a few thousands of patients with type 2 diabetes. Remember, I'm not talking about the guy who has 4% body fat and is a bodybuilder and can tell how much muscle he has based on how much he can lift. I'm talking about a 65-year-old person with a lot of body fat and generally excess protein. In that case, the question is, how many patients have I had to stop because I was worried about muscle loss? That would be like 0. Right, in 6 years. And because I use it in a therapeutic manner, that is, I'm not treating one person a week sort of thing, right? It's like every person who comes in every 10 minutes, I'll say, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. So it's just part of my clinical practice. So it's like hundreds of patients a year, and over 6 years, it's like thousands of patients. Like 0 people had to stop because I was worried about muscle loss, right? So it's like, okay, tell me how that is going to be a big concern to me, right? And this is where, again, it's like people who don't fast, and people rag on me all the time about this, right? It's like, oh, what about this? What about this? I'm like, okay, how many thousands of patients have you done this for? Try it on several thousand patients, and then come back to me and tell me if muscle loss is the most important thing for this 65-year-old, 300-pound man on 150 units of insulin.
It's a totally different situation.